In the last video I've made about Pope Francis, we talked about the interesting and the often complicated question of legacy. We talked about the fact that when it comes to Pope Francis, how he will be remembered and how I, of course, will remember him is colored by a few things, some good and some bad, some very bad even. You know, Pope Francis is not the first pope I've lived through. I've now lived through three: John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis. But wherein I would say that I was best kind of formed as a Catholic under Pope Benedict, I didn't have the sort of interest or the sort of opinions, and I certainly didn't pray for him as much as I have for Pope Francis. Pope Francis is really the first pope of my adulthood. This will be a complicated legacy, and I won't pretend that it won't be otherwise. I, of course, believe and hold that Pope Francis was the true Roman pontiff. If there's any evidence to the contrary, it doesn't terribly get me out of sorts. But I do believe that Pope Francis has been my spiritual father and my spiritual authority for the last 12 years. And I still wish he'd been nicer to his traditional sons. I think Pope Francis sometimes did some things that were terribly hurtful and terribly destructive. Of course, we can talk about the encyclicals. We can talk about Traditionis Custodes Fiducia Supplicans. But even in those little comments, right? Father to son, Trad's having mental illness, lace for your grandma, these sorts of things. They just were kind of mean. And I don't rejoice whatsoever in his death, because the ultimate thing is, regardless of how you might feel someone, even someone who you don't know personally, I don't know the Pope personally, I've never met him, even in audience, but even the great profound understanding as Catholics right now that I do pray very fervently that the Holy Father sees the face of God and lives.